Cool, now you really have to listen to me. Sorry. All right. So my name's Steve Smith from Combined Knowledge, and this afternoon we're going to talk about user adoption, or encouraging user adoption, and the whole premise around actually the building blocks behind a successful SharePoint deployment is not necessarily all the technical pieces that we all talk about, and the developer stuff that we all talk about, but there's a lot more fundamental stuff that needs to happen both before, during, and after SharePoint to make it all happen. It's joining all those dots together, right? The interesting aspect for me about this whole session, personally, is that I guess I'm one of the few people that comes from a sort of a real techie background, but also a business background. So being able to join those dots in a boardroom when you're having discussions and design sessions is a very powerful thing to have. It's good knowledge to have. And if any of you in this room are more technical than business focused, and it's great that you're here because that's really going to help you. For those of you that are very much IW and business focused, you're going to get a lot out of this, but also I hope you'll get out of it the fact that you need to get other people involved as well. It's really getting that key message across that there is more to adoption and take up and design than just simply putting it out there and making it look pretty. Okay? So it really is one of those sessions that appeals to all at the end of the day. So we're going to start by defining user adoption, a very interesting terminology that's appeared over recent years. Something that we started talking about in the SharePoint space many years ago. I remember talking about user adoption sessions and take up and roll up and all the rest of it at SharePoint in the 03 days, but nobody really got it then. It's taken quite a while for this sort of machine to roll fast enough where everybody's suddenly gone, oh gosh, yeah, we do need to address this, right? It's a real problem. So we're going to understand the importance of that vision as part of the design process. We're also going to look at defining some of those key people that are actually involved. So when we're building that team, we're getting those concepts together and all the rest of it. And then how to encourage the uptake of SharePoint, not just as part of the design phase, but what about after it's gone live? You know, is our job done after we've gone live? Absolutely not. So we're going to talk about and look at some of those things. I'm also going to cover things like quick wins. One of the things that I like to use when I talk to businesses about the fact that they've got SharePoint and how do they approach the actual common language in the design room. When you're sitting around with power users and IT pros and devs and CEOs and directors, and you're trying to find a way that they can actually say, yeah, I can see how this is going to help us. I can see how I can go back to my team on this pilot server and go, that actually makes quite good sense. Yeah, we can use that, and we could use it tomorrow if it was just set up right. So we like the concept of quick wins. Another interesting topic, and it's one that's going to be expanded upon in a session by Alex Pearce at the end of today, which is the whole training task-based learning mechanisms. So I'm going to touch on this a little bit, but Alex is going to go into a lot more detail about how he's gone through processes in education, about how you educate the different groups of people and different approaches that you have to take. Because the word training is also being hijacked a little bit in today's world, I think. It kind of doesn't mean the same thing. It depends what you're trying to achieve that determines what approach you need to take of education. And that's really what Alex is going to try and home in on in his session. So, defining the term user adoption. I've actually got a real problem with this term now. I never did 2 years ago, but I do now. Because it's just being hijacked over and over again and being made to sound like it's a singular, linear approach to solving the problem. And it is not. There is no user adoption program. There is no user adoption one-size-fits-all solution. It is definitely not the same for every company. In fact, SharePoint's probably one of those products that absolutely proves that statement, right? Because if you go and speak to 10 different verticals out there, every vertical will have a different vision and goal at the end of their requirement. How SharePoint will get used for that and how users will interact with SharePoint will be completely different. So when we turn around and say, define user adoption, I actually say to a company, well, what's the vision? What's the goals? What are the time frames that we're trying to achieve? What would you determine as a success at that point? Now, for some companies, that could simply be, we actually have a corporate intranet that everybody uses and goes back to every day or once every couple of days and uses it. Because most companies currently have an intranet that's so static, nobody ever goes to it, right? It's basically a dead fish. And all they've done is built SharePoint, made the intranet the SharePoint homepage, and still nobody goes to it. And they think, well, that's a blooming expensive intranet, right? And they're common perceptions of the user adoption could simply be, what are your current problems? Well, we'd love to have everybody going to the homepage of an intranet. Is that a tick box for you? Is that a win? Absolutely. That would be a major adoption win for us as a business. So when you're trying to think of that adoption goals, that kind of what are we trying to get out of this, don't always try to technical wizardry and all the rest of it. Don't try and over-engineer that solution. It might be the simplest few things that could solve that adoption to start with, to get people using it. Forms is a classic case of that, right? SharePoint, even 7 had this ability. In fact, 3 had the ability, but 7 was the one that really first started that whole forms-based mechanism, so we could create a form. It could interact with back-end data, and it could do all this fun stuff at the back end. But from a user's perception, what happened for them was they'd suddenly get a phone call or something, and it would be like, fill this in, or because I filled that in, it would pre-fetch all the other information from the customer database and populate all those other fields, tick a few boxes, drop a disk thing, bang, 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 submit, workflow, off it goes. Fantastic. Take all that paperwork out of the desks. I had one example of this where I was talking to a university and in the UK, and I was talking to their IT guy, and he just wanted to understand what SharePoint was. They were still trying to get to grips about that whole, we just don't know. And sometimes it's hard when you're trying to talk to a technical person about a business process, because they don't always get that. And it's always why failed SharePoint installations happen often when it's the IT team that have designed the solution for this reason. And I was sitting in the room with him, and we were just chatting, and I noticed he had a tray of paperwork, and I just said, you guys keep busy, don't you, with the old paperwork? And he said, yeah, they're all my expenses. And he had about, stacked this high of expenses. I said, did they owe you money then? He went, yeah, loads. I said, gosh, you're obviously not that bothered. And he went, actually, the problem is, if I want to get my expenses, I have to walk to the same counter that the students go to at lunch to process all of their financial stuff, and it takes about 45 minutes. Then I get to the counter, then she stamps it, and then I get paid about a month later. I said, so what if you had a process where you just filled it in a form, submitted it, and your manager okayed it because he knows you'd been there? Oh, that'd be fantastic. Well, there you go. There's your quick win. If that's an adoption, is that happen? Is that a common problem for your business? Oh gosh, yeah. Every professor has exactly the same problem. All of them. So I said, if you could have that automated in a simple form process, how much time would that save your staff a month? And quantifiably, they could then take that approach and now actually map it to something that would benefit directly the working day and time frame of people involved in that process. That was a quick win. So for them, having forms was a sellable point. Of course, you still need to get investment into SharePoint, right? So we went to the deans, the faculties, and all the rest of it, and what they wanted out of it was, I wish we had a way that we could all keep notes of the stuff that we do during our 85 meetings a week. And so we showed them a meeting workspace, and we went, what, like that? And they just went, God, that's it. Here's the budget to get SharePoint for the rest of the faculty. So for them, the quick win was a meeting workspace that kept tabs of all their minutes and all the rest of it and had scalable schedules of meetings in the calendar. That's all they needed. But out of the back of that, we had the forms for the professors and everybody else. And so all of a sudden, 2 or 3 simple, logical business processes were solved with not too much technical problems. Next thing you know, it's been adopted. I've got another example there, is when the publishing model works in SharePoint, start to finish. So this is my concept of, and I use the BBC as a good example of this. Imagine somebody in the BBC or a council for that matter. Anybody here in the public sector? Okay, so imagine in the public sector as well, like a council. We've got people who don't necessarily get involved heavily in the collaboration space and all the rest of it, but these people play an integral part of data processing. So they might be creating a sports report for the football match, or a bus timetable, or some form of public transport information. That information at the lowest level is absolutely zero use if it can't be found, right? So we've got things like metadata, some quick wins that we can apply. We've got term sets, which we'll talk about in a bit. All these different things that we can help them to build it up, that will then help it to surface up as well. Because once they'd finished their particular piece of information, it could workflow up to the manager, and if he approves it, would workflow that document or convert it automatically into HTML, and then update the public-facing website for that particular timetable, or for that particular match report on the BBC's soccer homepage. And because SharePoint supports the workflow foundation, we've therefore got very complex workflows that could be developed, or we could buy a simple third-party product that just gives us drag-and-drop workflow creation. And we could actually create a state machine workflow, literally in an hour, that could then add a new complexity to it, which could be where the editing chief of the BBC doesn't like a particular picture and then sends it back to the photographer to tweak it, which starts the workflow again back to the editing chief. If he likes it, he ticks the box, then it goes to the next one, and eventually it gets published to the BBC's public site. We have a start-to-finish capability from collaboration to the publishing space. But we are still not doing it right. And so what's happening is that the people down here are actually doing the good work, but the middle bit's getting lost. So the whole quick win of the whole process is not being realised by the business. So for some companies, that publishing model is the quick win. That is the adoption. If we can get that solved, that is the adoption tick box that says we actually are starting to use this product. So you have to define what those things would be for your business. That vision, how would you ever know if you didn't have it? What defines the success? I mean, a simple one, a very simple one, could just be people collaborating, hey, together. I mean, what a weird concept that is still, right? Come on, Joe, you can talk to Fred. Oh, no, I can't really, no. Different department. Yeah, but forget the department. Let's break those walls down. So let's have team sites that are based on not departments. Let's have sites by function or operation. So that you have to go there to create your collaboration. And we have the security structure, though. You just add Joe and Fred, and they've got access to that site already. So they're already collaborating. Change the mentality, that approach. But there lies the problem, because the buzzword at the minute of user adoption, you kind of think, user adoption, oh, that means that this means everybody's using SharePoint really, really busily, and they're all knowing what they're doing. That's not going to happen. It's going to take a long time to get there. So you've got to define how you measure that success when you define your collaborative, publishing, whatever mechanism you're going to put in place. That's what you've got to be able to... So when you say, we're going to design a SharePoint architecture around our collaboration, our sites, our site collections, we're going to have all these services that they're going to consume, that's all very well and good. But if you don't have a clear and precise map of what the users need to be able to achieve, you're never going to know if you've actually succeeded or not. Does that therefore mean you've helped adopt SharePoint? Sure. But the term adoption has to be very carefully managed here, else you end up going down a rocky road of just saying user adoption is using SharePoint. It doesn't work like that, right? So I'd say at the bottom of it, should it even be called user adoption? I don't think so. Not at all. I actually don't like the term anymore. I think it's being completely mishandled. We need to think about requirements, vision, measured success, what actually enables the user to do their job with the least amount of fuss that ticks all these boxes. So user adoption, you could use it as a header, but you've still got to have all these subheaders underneath it for those different variants of deployment. So I've been using this slide for a long time, and I still see no reason why it should change, okay? Now, okay, there are variants of it that I'll explain. But the bottom line is, if I go to a company and show them this slide and run through it, they all go, ha, 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 yeah. And the bottom line is, here's the vision up here, right? This is what we as a business want to achieve. Now, the CEOs are going to make this decision. This is not a user decision. This is not an IT pro decision. This is somebody in the business space running that company saying, in 10 years' time, I want our company to be working like this. And that, I did mean that, 10 years. See, people approach SharePoint and say it's a 2-year deal. I approach SharePoint and say, well, we start at 5 years, because that's a realistic minimum time frame to actually get to this fantastic beast of a system that we can use. If we actually take a 10-year approach, we've not only got the time to culture change our business and change the way our business processes work and function, we've actually got realistic phase approach of actually making that really happen. If you try and do it all in, 2 years or 18 months, those of you that have tried to do SharePoint in less than a year, you'll know the pain that I'm talking about. You just cannot light it all up. So you start with a vision. Now, these 4 steps in the middle are just 4 steps that I've added. I mean, I've gone as a linear thing, but it could be a hub and spoke instead. You could have 6 different things. You could have 20 in your business, right? The point I'm trying to make is that between the vision and the implementation, there's a whole bunch of other stuff that needs to happen. For example, business needs. A bit of an obvious one, really, when you think about it, right? We've got a vision, but how do we align that to the actual business needs itself? It's no use saying, you know, what we want is everything to be automated. Against what? What is the actual business requirement? What are we trying to do with our business process? Are we a manufacturing company? So if we're a manufacturing company, how are we aligning our vision to the needs of the actual products, the spares, the sales, marketing, all these different facets of the business requirement? But then that needs to align to the business logic, because you've got these business requirements that might have somebody creating a sales contract, spares being allocated, and then a data warehouse automatically knowing what's in stock, what isn't, so that when the user fills the form in for the sale, that's all relevant. Instead of the user filling the form in, no stock, 8-week delivery, customer doesn't know, upset customers, no more customer, out of business. Does that all happen in a week? No. Probably takes a while for it all to filter through, right? But the impact of not getting these 2 things right are profound. And this just doesn't apply to SharePoint, right? But the reason we're talking about this with SharePoint is because that's why we're here, is can SharePoint, come into this business space for us to help us adopt it properly? So these do become part of your design process. Don't get it right, SharePoint won't work. SharePoint doesn't work, it doesn't get adopted, if you want to use that term. But if it doesn't get adopted, what's the point of buying it and deploying it in the first place? This is the big space that companies are missing, still. They're still not getting this, and it really winds me up. They do not go to the users and do requirement finding that says, what is just really getting your goat? When I left school, 3 years ago, I was reminded of my age yesterday. It was quite frightening. But I know I look 30, so I appreciate that. I really do. And so anyway, when I left school, I went into engineering, because my father said that was the future in the UK. Even though I'd been writing BASIC for like 5 years as a kid, what do you need that for? And I remember sitting at in the machines, and they used to have a guy that would come around, and he'd go to every person's job, and they'd be watching what you were doing, timing it, and making sure everything was correct, so that in terms of what I needed as a user to make those parts, I was provided all the sufficient stuff and the metal and the raw this and the raw that and all the bits that I needed so that I could produce 1,000 of those in 3 hours was there so that I could do it, and bang, there was the finished product, and it made money. Now, what's the difference between that and what a user needs to do day to day in a collaborative environment? There is no difference. It's the same thing. You've still got to go to the user, figure out what they're trying to do, align your business logic to your end user requirements so that it actually works for them. Because if you don't, what's the point? This piece alone will determine the uptake of SharePoint over a longer time frame. This will determine success between 1 year and 5 years down the future. Because the SharePoint 2010 is so big compared to 7. I mean, it's vast. The architectural changes like information architecture and the governance piece and all that is so big, over 7 as well, that if we don't align these things, in 3 to 4 years' time, you will be redoing it, or it just won't be used. And this is an awfully big product to waste like that. Current IT infrastructure. okay, we have some technical sides that we need to deal with. These are your IT pros that are going to be talking to me about this in the IT pro tracks, right? Server hardware, resilience, making sure SharePoint's always available. It's backed up, we can restore stuff. This is the thing that these guys need to deal with day to day. Do they need to buy new server hardware, etc.? Obviously, there's a budget element to this. And for some companies who are migrating for 7 to 10, it's not just a question of migrating hardware, it's a question of migrating some of these elements because of the new capabilities of 2010. I'll give you a classic example. How many people in this room are on 7 already? Okay, how many of you people use content types? How many of you align content types with metadata? Okay, so we've slowly dwindled down a little bit. In SharePoint 2007, we always had a problem that they were very much site collection scoped, right? So we always had this kind of stream going down, and then we had another site collection, it became a problem. And so it was very hard to maintain consistency of all these core content types and metadata elements that were so cool, but kind of lost the value for us because we have to manage them at such a, really a granular layer as a site collection. In 2010, this has all been surfaced up to the enterprise. And you're going to see that, those who attend the sessions on metadata and all this sort of stuff. So we need to really make sure that we've aligned what 2010 can do, not just what you've been doing in 7, and adapt those changes. Because you might go back to 7 and say to a user, so we've had 7, what have been some of the problems? And they'll say, well, this content, we've got this metadata, but it's never quite right. And we've never had a way to update it. Whereas now we've got a situation where we can say to the admins, well, your departmental person's actually got the rights to update the metadata term sets now, on the fly. Oh, cool, okay. So we can just change it, because we're content experts. We know what we're actually going to add. Why do I need to rely on people who have no idea what content I actually need for metadata? Finally, we implement it. So assuming we've dealt with all these things in our planning design, we actually go and implement it, and then it goes live. Because we've ticked all those boxes, it goes live, people start using it because we've ensured that we've carried over that logical approach. That's the ivory white tower, right? This is what we can get to. But then, of course, I call in the IT pros and I say, well, what you've all gone and done is that. Isn't it just another email server or something? Can't we just install it, press the wizard, ding, 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 click the box? Now we're live. Use it, people. We know that's not going to work with SharePoint. It's absolutely ludicrous to think it would. But people are trying to make it work. And they've gone there, and then they've tried to make it work. You can't go that way. So I created this slide to try and prove that point. Give you a bit of tangible meaning to the terms. Get those groups of people around a boardroom table and show them something tangible. So here we've got 4 streams. And I've put them into 4 categories. Of course, you can break it down to however many you like. The point is I've got 4 completely different groups of people. Business and project managers. People who are very thorough in their understanding of those business processes, those business needs. To some degree, these people, or 1 or 2 of them, would be very much knowledgeable on the SharePoint methodology in the IW space, so they can align business process and need in SharePoint to the way the actual business needs it to work. Okay, so very good people to have around, or people to bring in a SharePoint planning element. Now, a lot of companies may already have a lot of this information to hand, because they may have gone through the exact same exercise 6 years ago when they were trying some other document management system that failed miserably. You'd be surprised how useful that stuff is still. Because if you're working for the same company, you haven't just changed what you make overnight. You still have the same business processes that you did 5 years ago if you're that company. So a lot of it is reusable. They've also got to think about systems integration, talking about those forms, right? What if we've got those forms that need to talk to a back-end system like a data warehouse or a HR system, right? We need to think about, we need to prepare for that. How are we going to integrate with it? What's important from day one? The IT pros, they're going to be doing hardware and testing and building servers, pilot testing servers and deployment and all that cool techie stuff that we love to get our hands dirty in, heads under the table, cables flying out the trousers. Developers. Okay, don't all moan at once. But, I mean, the developers have an important job to do. They need to get key customized deployments ready for the go-live date that map to the business requirements. One of the biggest problems I've seen in a lot of SharePoint, not necessarily failed deployments, but deployments that have gone way over time to be deployed and actually be usable, is the company is completely defocused of what the developers should actually be creating for the quick wins from day one. So instead of thinking of 3 to 4, 5 quick wins that would benefit the masses, they've concentrated all their development work on this really complex, integrated business intelligence, whiz-bang system, trying to do everything to all men in one go. And they spend 8 months developing it, and then it goes to 12 months, and then it doesn't quite work, so we've got to go back. Whereas if they'd actually got the developers and then just said, right, this is our 20 things wish list, here's a pie chart, what can you do in this time frame? And you get 8 out of the 10 or whatever, and those 8 out of 10 are core to the business, that's your phase 1. Now your phase 2 might be one of the other ones, and your phase 3 might be the last one. I'll show you some other bits on that in a minute. But the developers are very important from that perspective, that they've got to get their talents used in the right place early on. The users and the power users, these guys play an absolutely critical role understanding or helping us to understand the collaboration needs that they have in their groups, helping to design the site collection structures from the top down, because at the end of the day, if we understand what they want, we can build a collaboration model that actually flows so that as they build new sites, it goes in the right place, and we don't have to start worrying about redirecting or remapping site collections. Pilot testing it so that they can change it. Because I guarantee you, no matter how much you try and work through end users and power users and mentors to build the structure at the start, I guarantee you once they've actually got it and start playing with that content types and everything else, they suddenly go, oh, you know what, that one's not working. We found that we need to shift that to something else. So you will do a pilot testing and then a redesign at some point before you do that live thing. So you have to allow for that. Finally, all these teams that have been doing all this testing and all this other planning and change go live at the end of the time frame that you've allocated it to happen. And you'll notice on the bottom, I've kind of mentioned a rough time frame to expect for a SharePoint planning, design, and all this thing to take part before you go live. 6 to 18 months. The only time I've seen people successfully do it in less than 6 months is when they've got a lot of this information already to hand, and they've been able to quickly apply it in teams and get it done. Without that information, you're already on a longer-term lifespan because it takes a while to figure these things out. So when we talk about user adoption, how can we get SharePoint to use actually the product, to be at home, to actually make it work if we don't have all that as part of our SharePoint plan? And if we miss any one of those streams, we can potentially expect it to fail. The only times when we can possibly get out of it is if we're A, doing it out the box, and B, we may be bringing in-house developers in or not doing any development work at all for a while. But that's a pretty hard one to do unless you're buying third-party companies that kind of just drop in and do it for you, which is, of course, another option, right? So I like to use the terminology, the quick wins. And the reason I use the quick win terminology is because it should be exactly that. Something that I can use out of SharePoint, out of the box, that will solve some of those business logic and business requirements. The amount of times I have seen a company do something with SharePoint, add some functionality or code to it, and then when you go and speak to the user, you actually find out all they needed was a new list creating or a custom view. And that was all they wanted. But it was all over-engineered and over-complicated. And at the end of the day, they just went, I don't get it, which is what they will do. Because if it's not natural for them, it's not going to happen. I'm not going to pick on the public sector there, but I mean, whenever I've dealt with the public sector, we've always had situations, especially with councils, for example, where very fixed, well, in fact, the military as well, talking about the military, very fixed regimental in their approach, the way things have to happen. If you suddenly take it out of that comfort zone, way, way out the comfort zone, they're not going to use it. Not only will they not use it, they will rebel against it. Now you've got a problem where you're not encouraging the use of SharePoint, you're actually getting them to spread bad words about it. Now you're really going to struggle with your adoption. So we have the customization piece. There's some good sessions on SharePoint Designer in the next couple of days, right? But one of the things that people don't realise is just how much customization users themselves can do in the browser. Russell Norton is going to do a session tomorrow on in-browser customization stuff, tomorrow afternoon on the IW stuff. It's really interesting because he's going to show you just what you can do, literally, just by knowing where to go in SharePoint as a user, as a power user, and changing it there. No code, no designer, right there in the box. And I always find it amazing. In fact, so much so, in our SharePoint Designer class that we run, our first part of the whole class is forget SharePoint Designer. Did you know you could do this? And everybody goes, whoa, I didn't know that. Yet they'd go into SharePoint Designer and try and get somebody to spend their day doing this stuff in SharePoint Designer, breaking the master pages and taking it out of SharePoint's standard format, and breaking the inheritance side. And they didn't realise they could do it out of the browser itself. So making sure power users understand these options exist and showing them how to do it, that, to some degree, is more powerful as a user adoption quick win than any third-party tool a lot of the time you can deploy. Another thing that I like to talk to companies about is the best quick wins don't have to be work-focused. This is another thing that people miss, especially when you're trying to encourage a user base that has nothing to be encouraged about being at work, right? They turn up 9 to 5, they do their job, they fill stuff in, they go home. How are you going to excite them about that? Oh, look, we've got your Word 2010 instead. Okay. I didn't like 7 or 3 or 4, so I just type it, I'll do a letter. And I still can't find the flipping wizard. So how do you get some of those people actually active involved and get them to promote SharePoint, spread a virus? So one of the things that I like to say to people, and it's kind of, I have this battle with companies at the top table, the CEOs, the IT pros, things like my site, social networking. Oh, I don't want those. Why? Gives them too much power. Too much power to what? To have a place on their own. What, like a house? And it's like, oh, no, they can do stuff. Well, okay, yeah, they can do stuff. Maybe that's the best place for them to do certain things because you won't give them the right to do it anywhere else. But if they're doing the right stuff in there, why is it a bad thing? What about finding somebody in a business who looks after a particular social element of the business? What if they look after the whole social agenda for that company? There is no collaboration site that would fit into their remit because they're not a power user, they're not admin. All of a sudden they can have a site collection that they are the administrator and they can have team sites created and we could create a workspace so they can plan all the social agendas and invite everybody to it and have all the maps and all the bits and pieces that people need to attend. They could run a soccer club, a cricket club, a bowling club, a travel club, which wouldn't be very useful at the minute. But they could do all these things, and we could give them a space to do it. It has no place to exist in the collaborative structure of site collections for the business need. So where do we give people a space to do that? My site, social networking, is an ideal place for that. And because in SharePoint 2010, we now have this whole term set, metadata, tagging, social piece to it, we've now got an easier mechanism for others to find that as well, should they need to. So somebody could turn around and say, we've got a social event going, other people start to find it, they're invited to it, they tag it, now it gets raised up, and people start to find out about the social event or whatever it is we're trying to push through the social mechanisms of 2010. It was very hard to do in 7. In 10, it's a lot easier with the whole tagging. I mean, even the BBCs, if you've seen it, BBC on the election stuff, I know we're all fed up of it already, but you've seen it on the BBC where they have the big tags on the big wall. And even, it just shows that we can even get the BBC News reporters into tagging, right? So if they can take it up, any user can. The key is to get the people in the business at the top and the IT pros to understand why we're getting our users to use this. The quick wins can be found everywhere in SharePoint, most importantly. It can be found in the site collection, it can be found in the services that we create, like managed metadata, it can be found in sites, it can be found in lists, it can be found in item stuff, the way we roll up web parts and use particular workflows. Any level of SharePoint can benefit from a quick win. You've just got to position it at the right place. So this is what I kind of drafted. I've kind of built on this over the years of me doing stuff, and as new bits come available in new products, this is kind of some of my quick win list that I like to promote. Forms is always the obvious one. I've never been into a business yet where a forms automation does not pay dividends. The key with forms is to do it right, you know. If there's a back-end process that we can pull data out from another database to save the user thinking about it, they're going to like it. If you make them fill every tab in 55 times, and by the time they've finished it in, they've gone to lunch, they've come back, it's timed out, they press submit, it goes, you can't because it's timed out. Then they throw the computer out the window. We've all seen the video. So it's all very well doing forms, but we've got to try and approach it from a simplistic point of view to start with. So think of the forms, the quick win forms. What would be a forms for 80% of your workforce? You'll probably find it's things like expenses and holiday forms and I want to be sick next week form. The good thing is, these don't take long to make. Unless there's a bit of code at the back where the developers need to do some of the lookups to the back-end databases, for a lot of simple forms, a power user can do it. They just need to know how. And you'll be surprised once they know how, and they suddenly realise they've actually got the power to create these forms for their people, they suddenly start to do it a lot more. Most companies do not realise just how IT savvy quite a few people are within their company. But because they've always restricted what they could do, they've never found that out. And somewhere in your users, you find there's a few people in departments that can suddenly go, oh, this is so cool. Wow, I'm finding stuff out. But there's an interesting side note to this that I'm going to talk about in a minute, which is it's all very well them saying it's cool, but what happens 2 months later when they want to do it again? And they can't remember what that cool bit was. But they knew it was there, right? We have to think about that. Workflow, huge, right? Workflow, we don't need to underestimate workflow. Business needs, business logic needs workflow. We can have some simple workflows out the box like approval. We can add more complex ones using SharePoint Designer, which is a power user's job. And we can create really complex ones using Visual Studio as a developer. We can get third-party products that save us having the developer, like Nintex, K2, Skelter, and a whole plethora of workflow tools out there that just drops into SharePoint and gives power users the ability to build the workflows and deploy them. Hoorah. Content types, metadata document sets. We've got sessions on this throughout the 3 days. Very important to align metadata document sets to the way that our users will work. One of the key things about document sets you will find out if you go to the session tomorrow is that document sets above 2007 gives us the ability to group common documents together as a standard group set and then apply workflow to that group set. So if I've got a set of documents that might include a bunch of work for contracts and all the rest of it, and then I need to align that document set with the contracts and the supporting documentation and then workflow the whole thing out to a compliancy site, I can now do that as a group. The group can have logic applied to it. You should go and see that. It's a great new feature. Metadata and content types. Of course, we've scaled up to the enterprise. Very big, quick win. But of course, there is an element of metadata. In order for it to be a quick win, the business has to know what the corporate metadata structure and term set actually is. So that's no use if we don't have that project group at the top building it. Incoming email. It's been around since 7. It's not really changed much in 10, except that we do have a messaging content type. But incoming email is a great feature for a lot of people. You know, send out an email address, yeah, just send the email with the documents to that email address and it appears in a document library that kicks off a workflow that spreads those documents into the right place in SharePoint. We can have compliancy with email. So we could have emails coming in, it goes into a compliancy document library, that then kicks off required metadata, sends an email back to the user, says, hello, thanks for sending your document. However, we need a few more bits. Add some field values, resubmit the document. There's so many little things we can do with this. Out the box, it takes 2 hours to set that process up on a SharePoint box, literally. They just have to know what to do. Not the users, the IT pros. List and library columns. People underestimate the power of the list. Everything in SharePoint is a list, except for a site. But you know what I mean. All the collaborative spaces, list and document libraries, all of this place where the users actually get hold of the content, where it's all created and where they view it and where it's rolled up and aggregated and presented, is a list. So we aren't using lists properly enough yet. We're not using them at their full power of rolling up, presenting, filtering, views. There's a lot more we can do. So creating new views is a quick win. Using the send to capabilities. Everything in SharePoint in 2010 can be sent somewhere else. This is quite a sweeping statement, obviously. But we could have low-level collaboration stuff taking place, and a workflow kicks it off and moves it somewhere else to be part of a document center or a document set or a higher-level collaborative list. But what about the one that's just left? So one of the things we have with the ability to send in 2010 is something called leave a link. So we can actually send a document, leave a link where it was. It appears in another list somewhere else, but if the person clicks the document that looks like it was there, they actually end up going to the new location automatically. Now, have we had this technology in other products? Yes, we have. But now we've finally got it in SharePoint. Tagging and search, I've already mentioned. Tagging is huge, but search is even bigger, right? 90% of most users, when they realize that what you can give them in 2010 search is pretty much what they get at home through, the standard search tools that they use, they're going to like it. The problem is with search in SharePoint is the old phraseology of garbage in, garbage out. If you've not aligned tagging and search to content types and metadata, you're going to struggle to make that thing truly powerful, because there has to be a natural alignment there. My sites and profiles and aggregation, this is the whole social networking piece, give somebody a space to do the stuff where it doesn't belong anywhere else. So underutilized at the minute. I think Microsoft have made 2010 almost impossible to not use my sites. And if your company still goes down the route of saying, no, we are going to block it, I think you're going to struggle for you're going to lose a lot of the capabilities out of 2010, to be honest with you. Policies, information management policies. Again, a quick win could be a document library that after X amount of days expires and gets deleted or gets moved somewhere. Or a document that after a specific piece of metadata, when that metadata gets selected, that particular document now goes and does something or has a policy aligned against it, such as delete after a week or 7 days or a day. Depends what the need is, right? But a policy can be aligned to a document. The policy can say item retention, auditing, all this kind of stuff, workflow. So you can align a policy so that it's part of a content type, so that when a user creates a document with that content type, it instantly applies that policy to it, which says, after you've created it, after 7 days, I delete it. Why not? In certain circumstances, that might be ideal. Or it might send it somewhere else. This is huge. I don't know why I left it till last. Query and metadata-based navigation. Currently in SharePoint 2007, right, our users click navigational structures down the left. They've got document libraries, maybe sites expanding. You might have a plus kind of thing. But it's very structured and rigid around the top and what's below it. In SharePoint 2010, we now have the ability to have query-based navigation. We actually have web parts and quick launch add-ins out the box for navigation that can build the information in the middle pane based on what you've selected in your navigational pane. So if my metadata and my content types and my tagging and my term set all align nicely, I can just turn on metadata navigation and the user does no longer have to worry about which site or which site collection stuff is in, because the minute they start browsing the navigation tree and start browsing by shoes or by product, by sales contract or by a particular sales vertical, the navigation will actually start building and subcategorizing based on where they've started going. And what they will now find is that they are no longer seeing the site collection tree. They are now starting to build everything amongst all the site collections, and it builds into the navigation because it's query. All it's doing is bringing the search into a navigational piece. Wow. But for that to work, you've got to have all this working. But that is literally a web part or a tick box that drags it on, and the power user just simply says, here's a navigational piece, I want it to be defined by these content types, this metadata, and these term sets. And they just drop it on the page, and it makes sense to the users, right? Finally, alerts, RSS, search and content. So again, RSS feeds, very underutilized by users. Most of them haven't got a clue what they are. They've probably always wondered what that button was at the bottom of the page. You're amazed how they pick up on these things, and they go, yeah, actually, I really like that. I hate the alerts, because let's face it, you teach people alerts, they go and create 500, then they create the rule in their Outlook that sends it to the other folder because they can't be doing with the spam. Then they don't read them. And even if you try to teach them at that point, oh, look, you can do a summary every day. And then they get the summary and they go, oh, I've got to get back to my Word document now. Doesn't quite work. So as much as alerts are good, you have to be a bit careful how you teach users to use them. I like search alerts better. And if you've never tried that, give it a go. The ability to put a search phrase into SharePoint and then tag it as an alertable query. So that when the index next runs that query, and if it finds any new content based on that exact search parameter, it will let the user know there's a new document that matches your search parameter over in that site collection. How cool is that? Much better than the standard alerts. Until they create 500 of them, of course. So let's have a look at some of those things in action. I've got 15 minutes, right? Does that sound about right? It does, doesn't it? Nobody's knocking at the door for him. Well, as soon as nobody knocks at the door, we'll stop. So let's just get out of this. Let's just get out of this and just show you some of these things working. All right. So here's my demo. It's this particular one is using a Enterprise Wiki template. For those of you that have been messing around with SharePoint, who's been fiddling around with SharePoint Beta here? Who's some beta testers? Fantastic. All right. So those of you that have been testing SharePoint Beta, you'll have noticed that the site directories template wasn't there anymore. Yeah, that might be slightly confusing. But there are reasons why they didn't put it in to start with, understandably, because of the whole query-based navigational piece. Why do we need fixed site directory nav when we can actually dynamically build it on the fly anyway and use sites as a parameter to break it down? But there is actually a Codeplex project out now that's literally been worked on by a guy called Martin Kern, who's doing his session right now. So you won't be, it's a techie-focused thing. But if you're interested in it, watch the video when you get the sessions. And he's talking about how to re-enable that site directory template and be able to use it in 2010. And they've released an updated version now. This is a Microsoft guy who's built this, and they've deployed it into Codeplex. So you can download it for free for 2010. So Enterprise Wiki. Then what I've done is I've built some other sites across it, you know, just to show some features and stuff. I've decided that the wiki might just replace the blog. I don't blog. I hate blogging, purely because, for me, technical articles don't fit in a blog, white papers for me. But I quite like the idea of the wiki because I can align my white papers with a nice kind of flexible interface to edit it and update it. So I've decided that WikiMe is the future. So I think we might have a term there that we could really take out of this. The elements of this site, I've added some search and some collaborative sites along it. Notice that we've got things like page ratings. And page ratings, even though people are going to go, you know, I'm not quite used to that, especially some of the, shall I say, slightly not so young generation, are going to have some problems with some of the new terminology and features of 2010. We call this the generation gap, you know, the collaboration generation gap, if you will, because what we've got at the minute is a plethora of people, you know, 20-somethings out of university that are living and breathing this stuff. Tagging, ratings, search through it, it all makes sense to them. You've got the 40-something, well, actually probably the 28-somethings, I don't know. But we've got the slightly next generations where to them it's just short. They just don't get it. It's like a whole new different persona. I mean, my dad's a classic case. You know, he'll use, if he can bet a horse on it, he's on the internet in a flash. You know, if he needs to find anything else, it's just, I'm panicking, can't figure it out. And we have this generation gap, which is like, what is that doing there? Why is it tag? I don't know. Why would I want to tag it? So the BBC News at the minute is confused. He doesn't understand these big words and the small words. And so when we think about how we're going to use this piece and present it to our workforce, we have to consider that generation gap. How are we going to make it appeal to those different bits of the unit? And how are we going to encourage certain different groups to get involved and see the benefit? But ratings, for example, help search relevance. As an example, I've got a document library, a site here called Sweden, and it is in honour of our Swedish friends who are all here, and especially one that drove 1,300 miles over the weekend to get here. Although he has been ousted now, I've been told. Somebody came from Poland, and they've done them, so the Swedes are out now, I'm afraid. So here we've got and a good example where we've got some sales documents, and in this particular document library, and by the way, we've got the ribbon, right? Yay, ooh, I don't know. This is going to confuse users, though, isn't it? They're going to go there and they go, what do I do? How do I edit the document? I can't see anything. And you have to go, we have to click documents. Where's that? Left or right mouse? Because it will happen. So they get the ribbon. You'll notice, though, in this document library, we've got lots of things happening. We've got checked out, we've got a padlock, and we've just got normal documents. And what we're seeing here is that this is one document library that is supporting both collaborative documents, check in, check out, plus document management through in-place records management. So we can actually have the ability, anywhere in SharePoint, to actually say to a document, this document is final, it's locked, it's a contract. So we make it a declared record. Now it's part of our compliancy story. But it doesn't have to go anywhere. It can stay here, amongst its other friends that are doing other stuff that's collaborative in nature. And maybe by changing that, we may change some metadata. Now, that document might not actually live here, right? That could be a link to it being in the record center or a document center. But we can now support multiple methods in SharePoint, such as collaboration and document management and information compliancy, all in the same library. So I can go into a properties of a document and I can go into its compliancy details, and I can see what the situation is with that document from a compliancy view when it decides to work. Whilst we're waiting for that to pop up, which it is going to do in a second, there you go. See that? So we can see what the contract is, when it's been declared, what happens to it after that. And this is all user created. This is not IT Pro created. The users, the power users, are creating these compliancy situations. I can also align it to document IDs. So I can actually have sites where every document gets a unique document ID that follows it no matter where it goes. So even if it appears in a record center, I can align that document ID. I can search for the document ID. And it stays with that document. It cannot change as it works its way through the life cycle of SharePoint. Notice I've got my various metadata here. Yeah. So if I go and create, in fact, let me just edit this one, my C3PO sales contract. So you notice that in this particular document, we've got various pieces of metadata. One of the things that I've done with this metadata is I've specifically aligned it to keywords. These keywords are coming from my corporate term store, the metadata that's stored in the enterprise. So if I want to add some managed keywords, so in other words, the term shoe was a bit too generic, right? I'm actually thinking, this is not just about a shoe. I want to be a bit more specific so that my search results are actually homed in on this. So I could turn around and say it's actually a suede shoe. And as we build it, the term set comes from my corporate piece and starts giving me metadata. So this is a shoe. It's a blue suede shoe. So we could say it's blue as well. And we'll notice that as we as we start to build our taxonomy, the idea behind the taxonomy is that we give the users the ability, based on as they start to do their metadata, it auto-fills it for them. Thus taking out the guesswork of which is the corporate required stance on it. Now, sure, there's nothing stopping us from having fixed field values here. I don't want you now, go away. See, it's giving me suggestions. He's saying, stop, you've not selected anything. Look, carry on. See, doesn't like that. But you'll notice here, we've got additional field values that are fixed to that particular document library, for example. So as well as having corporate metadata coming down and being part of the item, we can also still employ local filters that the people there can manage. So we can mix the two together. There's no particular rule that says otherwise. And then because we're assigning that managed keyword and mapping it, we can then do other things from it. For example, here's a couple of settings on the left. So here's some query-based navigation where I might want to see documents listed only by a particular contract type or by sales financial, if I've got one of those, or a sales quote. No, I haven't got any of those either. But then what if I want to filter that even further and say, actually, I want to buy this equals or at least a profit of, say, 50,000. Oh, that helps to actually scroll up to see it. And then we start to get filtered views. So what we're doing here is, rather than actually applying the filter at the top, we're giving people the ability to take that metadata and filter our values results on that particular metadata that we choose. We can even adapt the metadata to be all-encompassing, not just from the library or the site, but from all the site collections as well. On top of that, and that's really cool, right? That's a very cool feature. It is, really. On top of that, let's just go back to here, onto the team site. Now, this particular team site, I've given you another example. In fact, I'm going to go over to the official document lot. So I've got a Corp official doc center here. So this is a document center. It's not big enough for compliancy. We don't want it to be records management for the whole, it's not audited and all the rest of it. But we still need somewhere where we can drop certain key corporate documents, policies, maybe some contracts, depending on what we want to do. We need them out of the collaborative space, and I need somewhere for it to live where my users don't all get full access, but they can still get there to read the content, right? The document center is a good template for that. But notice how we've instantly got certain management features turned on, such as search for a doc ID. In this particular document center here, you'll notice that we have this drop-off library. And this drop-off library is basically there to act as an auto-routing mechanism. If any of you dealt with record center templates in 2007, you'll know what we mean here, because if an item went to a record center, we could set rules that routed it to a library that matched the metadata. We can now do that per site in SharePoint 2010. So if I go back to my Sweden site here and pick up my sales, and I find a sales contract here, and go to the drop-down. Now, I'm obviously using the manual send-to mechanism. This could be part of a workflow, right? I can send it to the document center. And that says, yep, I'm going to send it there. It's going to go to the drop-off library in that location. I can keep a link between... Oh, gosh, okay. Woo. Oh, that's the... You should be using RTM box. I've seen that one before. So what that would do at that point is it would send the document to this drop-off library, and then the drop-off library looks at your defined parameters like the metadata, and then in my example, it would map the sales contract north metadata field value and would drop it into that particular folder. But notice how I've also told it, if it matches the north field, put it in a folder called north. So I've now sub-categorized it by folder. And if I go in there, I shall find the North region contracts. And these have been routed automatically through that send-to process into the drop-off library into that library. So this is called Content Organizer. Very nice feature and easy to set up as the users. Finally, before we finish, I'll just show you search, just to give you a bit of an inkling. Actually, I'll show you my sites as well in a sec, because there's nobody at the door banging away here. So let me search for sales. So I'm going to do a quick search. It doesn't look very exciting, the search page. Obviously, we can customize all of this. We can add lots of more tabs and have lots of customized search experiences. But we've got a lot more search web parts in 2010 than we've ever had before. Dozens of the things. Certainly in the relevancy in the result set, they've gone to town in terms of how to manage that. Notice that we've got the search-based email alert link here. We've got the RSS feed to that query as well. I've also got, apart from the standard fixed formats of the search result set, notice how down the left-hand side we can have different categorizations so that I can home in as a user to refine those results. Now we can start to see things like my tags appear. Now they start to see why it was useful for them to remember that tagging in the first place. So I can click on my blue, and then I've got shoes, and I can see specific contracts that map to that term set. And now we get 3 instead of 30. And it's built that page on the fly. I have done nothing out of the box to do that. It's all there. You've just got to make sure you've got your metadata and all your tags happening in the right context. Then it makes sense. My sites, very quickly. I'll just give you a quick my sites because I do like my sites. And obviously, everything you do with SharePoint 2010 affects the relevancy and search results, okay? So the more stuff you put in, the more accurate it is, the more better stuff's going to come out and relevant at the right level. And so in a My Site, we have a lot more things structured. If you remember My Sites from 2007, they were a bit clunky. We have nice tabbing formats where we can look at the organizational space. We can look at various content that we've worked on. We can look at tags and notes, a la BBC, you know, where our different tags start to take effect. Our colleague trackers is all there. And we can see we've got Wilma here. So let's go and have a quick look at Wilma, see what she's about. So there's Wilma's public profile page. Of course, Wilma used to be a housewife, but has since left Red for Bonnie, who seems much more understanding. Of course, that's one of those Facebook entries that you really wish you didn't put up there, right? But that's something else that we've got. You see, we've got that whole organizational structure that's now building into a great social networking piece. And again, if we've got all these tags and content going in and we've got relevancy in our search results being governed by what people are putting in their My Sites as well, through that whole social element. So Matt Groves is doing a Web 2.0 session on that whole social piece to understand what is this all about? How do we actually take that strategy into the business to understand using this properly? But there's some great features in My Site and social networking as well, not to be missed. Okay, I'm just gone over, so we're probably going to struggle for questions. Probably got a few minutes for questions. But for those of you who want to shoot off, thank you very much. Obviously, we recorded all this. You'll be able to get a download of it and watch it all again. And if you've got any questions, hang around or come and see me later down on the stand. But thank you very much.